According to the book of Genesis, in chapter 17, Yahweh made an agreement, or a covenant, with one of his early servants, a man named Abraham. According to this covenant, Abraham would be blessed by Yahweh, and that his descendants would eventually constitute mighty nations. But in order for this covenant to take place, Abraham and his descendants would be required to complete a particular requirement as a token of the covenant. This token wouldn't be a secret handshake or a special hairstyle or something you might expect. Instead, Abraham and all of his offspring were to be ritually circumcised. Abraham, of course, was to be circumcised as an adult, but all of his descendants thereafter would be circumcised as 8-day-old babies. Moreover, if any male infant's parents neglected to circumcise the child on the 8th day, the child was to be killed. I know at this point some of you are noticing that the title of the video is Ritual Genital Mutilation, and that now I'm talking about circumcision, and some are going to argue that no, circumcision is not genital mutilation. You may have been circumcised yourself. You may have had your son circumcised. For whatever reason, you feel circumcision is good and healthy and certainly isn't mutilation. So I'm going to take a moment to discuss the practice of circumcision and explain why I think it qualifies as genital mutilation. First, it's worth noting that a healthy foreskin is not a birth defect. It's not a worthless piece of skin. It serves a purpose in that it protects the glands from injury in a similar way to the eyelid protecting the eyeball from injury. Of course, the glands aren't as easily injured as the eyeball, so the eyelid is more necessary, but still the function of the two are similar. Circumcision of healthy foreskin is medically termed non-therapeutic circumcision. In other words, it's not fixing a problem because, as I mentioned, the foreskin itself is not a problem. Some people have still argued that non-therapeutic circumcisions still bear enough benefits to warrant widespread use of the practice, but the evidence just hasn't borne this out. While it is true that a circumcised man who practices poor hygiene is more likely to suffer infection, this is largely negated by the fact that he can simply practice good hygiene, something the Hebrews were inclined to do anyway because of their religion and culture. Also, in some cases, it's been shown that tobacco smokers are slightly less likely to suffer one particular rare kind of cancer, penile cancer, and heterosexual men who practice unprotected sex, if they're circumcised, are slightly less likely to contract AIDS from their female partners. But of course, neither of these were issues for the ancient Hebrews, and in both cases there are today more reliable ways of avoiding the problems, specifically not smoking and not practicing unprotected sex. And what's more, circumcision is a surgical procedure that carries with itself certain risks. For instance, there's the risk of, you guessed it, infection, along with hemorrhage, either of which was more likely before the advent of modern medicine to be lethal than it would be today. And it's reasonable to assume there were probably at least some children in ancient times who died as a result of complications, post-operative complications after having been circumcised. So it's also reasonable to conclude that these risks would have more than negated any minor health benefits that might have been provided to the ancient Hebrews by circumcision. This fact can also be borne out by the fact that the majority of Israel's neighbors at the time were uncircumcised, as was the majority of Earth's population in general throughout history, and Israel's neighbors were said to be more numerous than the Israelites were themselves. This shouldn't have been the case if the foreskins of those uncircumcised neighbors were causing them problems. More important, though, is the fact that Genesis didn't say the circumcision was for health reasons. According to chapter 17, Yahweh said it was a token of a covenant, like you might expect a secret handshake or special hairstyle or something like that. And remember that if a male child wasn't circumcised, Yahweh didn't warn that it might get a disease. He actually said, according to Genesis, that the child should be murdered. So I think taking all of these factors together, we can easily qualify circumcision as genital mutilation, since it's an unnecessary and dangerous surgical procedure meant to remove healthy tissue from the child's body. What's more, it would be performed without any anesthesia or any pain relief at all, and at least in some cases, the instrument used for the circumcision would be a sharp rock. Therefore, if one's to believe that the Bible is true, then that would mean a God who's described as wise and loving required his servants to perform painful, dangerous, and completely unnecessary surgical procedures, genital mutilations, on their infant sons. And if a parent had mercy and didn't want to perform a dangerous, unnecessary, and horrifically painful surgical procedure on their infant, according to the Bible, God prescribed that the child was to be killed. When you use your critical thinking, does this sound plausible to you? Would a wise and loving Creator require his servants to carry out such a harmful practice? What do you think?